Night was falling over the interstate between Phoenix and Tucson like a heavy blanket covered with black clouds that foretold a storm. The air was saturated with humidity, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the gasoline of trucks that roared in the distance. The asphalt, still hot from the day's sun, began to cool under the first drops of rain that hit the windshields of cars. In that grim setting, a twisted metallic silhouette was trapped in damp grass and rocks, a car overturned and crushed. And then something unexpected happened. In the midst of that chaos, in the densest darkness, he perceived the unmistakable sensation of a hand taking his, a warm hand, firm, impossible in that desolate place. He was not alone. Before continuing with this story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here you will find impactful stories, full of emotion and hope that can touch your heart and accompany you in moments of doubt. Don't forget to activate the notification bell so you don't miss any. Other hand had taken a different path. He was a logical, pragmatic man. His world revolved around blueprints, calculations, and concrete structures. His mother's prayers seemed to him like simple traditions without real weight. Sunday masses for him were more a family routine than an act of faith. He never considered himself a believer. His ambition was focused on growing professionally, on proving his talent, and building a life where certainties came from his effort, not from the invisible. Life, but that night, trapped between the iron of a destroyed car, his convictions were beginning to waver. The world he had built with certainty seemed to crumble with each passing second. And that mysterious hand holding him in the midst of pain was an impossibility for his rational mind. However, the simple contact transmitted calm to him, as if a silent voice was telling him, "Resist. It's not your time yet." Sebastian, without knowing it, was about to begin the most important chapter of his. Marked by the clock and the demands of his profession. He woke before dawn, when cold air still seeped through window cracks, and rushed toward the construction site. The morning hustle of the city accompanied him street vendors offering burritos and coffee, the roar of trucks on the avenues, and endless lines of automobiles that never seemed to move. His routine was so strict that he rarely stopped to observe the beauty of the city. The aroma of grilled corn near the central plaza, the distant. U.S., she repeated in her sweet voice each time he left. He would smile, give her a quick kiss on the forehead, and respond evasively, "Yes, Mom. You know I take care of myself." Patricia, his younger sister, would tease him mischievously. "Brother, one day you're going to realize that faith also builds things, even if you don't see them on the blueprints." Sebastian would just shake his head and change the subject. Living with them was warm, but there was always an invisible tension. Mrs. Rosa. The parish. Sebastian set down his utensils and sighed. "Mom, those are things people make up to feel hopeful. I believe in what I can see, measure, and verify." The woman looked at him patiently, unruffled. "And I believe, son, that there are things that cannot be measured, but that sustain life more than any calculation." That contrast defined the essence of Sebastian, a hard-working, dedicated, but unbelieving man. His co-workers respected him for his discipline and leadership ability. He stopping before makeshift altars. All of that seemed like folklore to him, part of the urban landscape, but not a truth he could trust. However, within him there was a crack. Though he never confessed it, there were nights when exhaustion overcame him, and he wondered if his own effort was truly enough. He stared at his bedroom ceiling, with the murmur of his mother's prayers filtering from the living room, and thought about how fragile life was. He shook off those ideas and focused on the next. Expecting a routine meeting, but his boss's voice jolted him immediately. "Martinez, I need you to go today to check the progress on the bridge in Arizona. We've had reports of structural failures, and we can't wait." Sebastian frowned. It wasn't common for him to be sent in an emergency, but he accepted without hesitation. "All right, I'll leave in an hour." The day was cloudy. From early on, the wind carried a smell of humidity that announced rain. Sebastian said goodbye to his mother with a candy sellers offering merchandise between lanes, and motorcyclists zigzagging hastily. Sebastian turned on the radio, searching for a distraction with a song, but the noise of traffic forced him to concentrate on the wheel. Little by little he left behind the urban bustle, and as he reached the outskirts, the air became fresher with a slight smell of pine descending from nearby forests. On the interstate, the view was a contrast of green mountains and scattered settlements. On one side, Dark announced a storm. Sebastian checked the clock. He wanted to arrive before nightfall. He knew the highways could become dangerous when rain fell hard, but he trusted his driving ability. Even so, there was a strange weight in his chest, an unease he couldn't shake off. He remembered his mother's words before leaving. That way of asking him to take care of himself accompanied him as a constant echo. He sighed, trying to chase away the unease. Just nerves, he muttered to himself. There's... At full speed, the sound of water on the car roof was deafening, and visibility decreased even more. Sebastian clenched his jaw and kept driving, though each kilometer seemed more challenging. He felt a mixture of anxiety and stubbornness. He didn't want to stop, didn't want to seem weak. His mind repeated that he had to reach the bridge as soon as possible, but deep down something told him that this trip would not be like the others. There were signs he could not ignore. The heavy sky, the early. Rapidly, but it wasn't enough. The rain fell so hard it seemed like a liquid wall, reducing visibility to barely a few meters. Sebastian breathed with difficulty, aware that any mistake could cost him dearly. Come on, concentrate, he muttered to give himself courage. Suddenly, the lights of a semi-truck appeared ahead, dazzling, reflecting in the water. Sebastian instinctively braked, and the screech of tires on wet pavement was like a metallic scream. The car skidded. He felt control escape. Flew inside the cabin. The silence afterward was more terrifying than the noise, barely broken by the patter of rain entering through the shattered windows. Sebastian tried to breathe, but a sharp pain in his chest cut off his air. He coughed, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. The safety belt kept him fastened, but he felt the twisted metal imprisoned him like a trap. With effort he tried to move his leg, but unbearable pain paralyzed him. He looked down and saw a piece of bent. Probably been lost among the wreckage of the crash. The isolation was absolute. Nobody seemed to have seen the accident. Fear gripped him more than the metal. Time began to distort. Each second trapped there seemed eternal. Sebastian thought of his mother and Patricia. The image of his family table appeared in his mind. His mother's prayers, his sister's jokes, the warmth of a home that at that moment felt distant, almost unreal. A metallic sound creaked when he tried to move his arm. The pain. Fear. What if everything exploded in the midst of that chaos, with life slipping away like sand between his fingers? Sebastian understood that he was facing a battle he couldn't win alone. And while the storm continued to strike relentlessly, something unexpected was about to happen. The silence inside the destroyed car was so deep it seemed to devour everything. You could barely hear the constant patter of rain seeping through the cracks and the occasional creak of metal settling under its own. Fingers as if someone had taken his hand. He opened his eyes abruptly, thinking that a rescuer had arrived. But there was no one, only darkness, rain, and him trapped in that metal tomb. Fear shook him. Who? Who's there? He stammered with a broken voice. He received no answer. However, the sensation persisted. It wasn't cold or rough, but a soothing caress that contrasted with his body's pain. In the midst of his confusion, a memory struck him. His mother's voice, so many times repeated on was telling him to hold on, not to let himself be defeated. Sebastian's mind began to wander. He remembered childhood, when he ran through the cobblestone streets of his neighborhood and fell in rough games. Then his father would lift him up by the hand with a smile that returned his security. He felt that same security now, but multiplied. The smell of gasoline kept permeating the environment, mixed with the humidity of the forest. Every sound of the storm outside seemed distant, as if he were. Vulnerability. The rational engineer, a man who always demanded proofs and calculations, found himself shattered, sustained only by something he couldn't explain. Tears flowed without control. Each second seemed eternal, but they were no longer seconds of absolute terror, but of silent resistance. He didn't know how much time had passed since the accident, but something inside told him he had to stay conscious. Maybe help would come, maybe not, but as long as that hand accompanied him, he. Grew heavier. He knew that this night was not yet over. The rain was lashing furiously when a pair of ranchers from the area, Mr. Robert and his son Michael, heard a distant crash. They had gone out to check that their animals hadn't escaped from the pen because of the storm, but that noise wasn't normal. They looked at each other with concern and walked with flashlights toward the highway. "Did you hear that, Dad?" asked Michael, barely 18 years old. "Yes, son. It sounded like an..." slippery hillside. The smell of gasoline was strong, and the sound of the storm mixed with the constant drip of leaking fuel. Sebastian, semi-conscious, heard muffled voices and for a moment believed he was dreaming. He tried to move his lips. Here, he barely managed to say Mr. Robert heard him and shouted loudly, "Someone's alive here. Hold on, young man, we're coming." They tried to open the door, but it was completely jammed by the impact. Michael searched in the grass and found a large. "If we go get help?" "Yes, son. You run to town and call the fire department. I'll stay here with him." Michael climbed the slope running, while Mr. Robert knelt next to the car. He took Sebastian's free hand, not knowing that this gesture repeated something he had already felt minutes before. "Don't leave me, sir," whispered Sebastian, barely conscious. "I won't leave you, young man. Help is coming." Time became eternal until 15 minutes later the wail of sirens was heard. 2 rescue trucks and a "Sir, we're almost there. We'll get you out alive." The minutes seemed like hours. Each cut was a step toward freedom, but also a risk because of the spilled fuel. The rescuers worked with precision, while Mr. Robert watched with his heart in his throat. Finally, after a last effort, they managed to open enough space to pull Sebastian out. They placed him on a rigid stretcher, securing his neck and leg. He, gasping and groaning, managed to murmur, "Thank you. I thought I wasn't going to get out of." The smell of disinfectant mixed with blood and the damp smell of Sebastian's soaked clothes. The paramedics worked without rest, an oxygen mask over his face and 4 in his arm, and rapid words he barely understood. "Blood pressure low but stable," said one of them. "Clear fracture in the right leg." "We need to rule out internal bleeding," answered Lavra, keeping her hand firm on the patient's shoulder. Sebastian found himself torn between consciousness and sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, that created an atmosphere of tension. As soon as he was admitted to emergency, a young doctor began the assessment. "We need X-rays immediately. Prepare abdominal studies, too. There's risk of bleeding," he ordered quickly. As they transferred him, Sebastian felt an emptiness in his stomach. Pain kept him alert, but what worried him most was uncertainty. What if I don't make it? Not long after, Mrs. Rosa and Patricia arrived running. A neighbor who had heard the news on the radio had tears in her eyes, approached too. "Brother, don't you dare leave us, you hear me?" The doctor intervened with professional calm. "We need you to leave. We're going to move him to tests. He has serious fractures, and we need to make sure there's no bleeding." Mrs. Rosa nodded, though her eyes didn't leave her son. "I'm going to pray for you, Sebastian. You're not alone." The transfer was immediate. X-rays, ultrasounds, blood tests. Each test brought more concerns. Exposed fracture in the leg. Every movement as if she feared losing him at any moment. "I don't know how you're still here, son," said the mother softly. "It's a miracle," Sebastian, still incredulous, murmured with barely a whisper. "I don't know, but I felt like someone was holding me." Mrs. Rosa looked at him intently, with tears running down her cheeks. "Then you're not wrong. Jesus was with you." Sebastian closed his eyes without strength to respond. The memory of that hand pursued him, confusing, impossible to explain. Matter how small, reminded him of the accident with a sharp pang. "I can't take it any more," he whispered one afternoon when the nurse asked him to try to sit up a bit. "I know it hurts," she replied, adjusting his pillow, "but it's necessary that you cooperate. If you don't make the effort now, recovery will be slower." Sebastian clenched his teeth, fighting the pain. He felt his whole body was at war with him. Impatience dominated him, and his pragmatic character clashed with the slowness of the "Lose my job?" Patricia crossed her arms, glaring at him. "I'd rather have you here limping than not have you at all." Those words disarmed him. He lowered his gaze, aware that his sister was right, though the anguish still devoured him from within. The nights were the most difficult. When the hospital fell silent, and only the footsteps of a guard could be heard in the hallways, Sebastian was trapped in his thoughts. He relived the accident, the crash of metal, the fear of being alone and above. Was unbearable, and each session left him exhausted. One morning, the physical therapist, a robust and patient man named Julian, encouraged him with a grave voice. "Don't give up, engineer. I've seen many worse than you stand up again. You just need discipline." Sebastian sighed with frustration. "I have discipline, Julian. What I don't have is patience." "Then learn it, because there's no other way here." The hospital's lack of resources complicated everything even more. You had to wait your turn. He didn't even understand. Recovery was slow, painful, and frustrating, but Sebastian was beginning to recognize that he wasn't alone in the fight. Each gesture from his mother, each scolding from his sister, and each encouraging word from doctors and nurses sustained him. Although he didn't want to fully accept it, this invisible network kept him afloat. And while time advanced in the hospital, a certainty was being driven into his interior. That hand in the darkness hadn't been the end, but today, Sebastian looked at him with some distrust. He didn't feel like talking, but the old man's kindness disarmed him a bit. "I've been better," he responded in a dry tone. Mr. Robert laughed softly. "That I imagined. Nobody likes being locked up between white walls." Over the following days, Robert's presence became constant. Sometimes he arrived with old books to read to him, other times with sweets he got at the market. He wasn't a doctor or nurse, but he transmitted a different kind of serenity. The pain never disappears, but it transforms. And when I understood that, I found a purpose to be here where others need companionship. That revelation made Sebastian lower his guard. He felt understood for the first time since the accident. Conversations with Robert became a kind of refuge. They talked about everything: football, Mexican food, memories of the old man's youth, but also about deeper topics like faith and the meaning of life. "I'm not a believer," admitted Sebastian one. Robert's words accompanied him, even on silent nights. He remembered the warmth of that hand, the impossible calm that invaded him in the midst of chaos. He wanted to deny it, but he couldn't tear it from his memory. One day, when Patricia arrived from university, she found her brother smiling shyly while talking with the volunteer. "Wow, someone's doing you good?" she said mischievously. Sebastian shrugged his shoulders. "It's just a stubborn old man who won't stop talking." Robert laughed. "And not named with prayers?" For the first time since the accident, Sebastian allowed himself to think that his pain could transform into something more than desperation. And in silence, he thanked God for finding Mr. Robert in that unexpected place. Weeks passed, and although his body showed signs of improvement, Sebastian's mind seemed to become more entangled each day. Rehabilitation exercises continued to be painful, but what really exhausted him was the silent battle within him. Each time he practical but sensitive way, kept telling him, "You don't need to understand it. Just accept that someone wanted you to stay alive." One afternoon, while Mrs. Rosa prayed in the chair next to the bed, Sebastian interrupted her with a tired voice. "Mom, have you ever doubted your faith?" She looked up surprised by the question. "Of course, son. Everyone doubts at some point, but faith isn't having answers. It's trusting even when you don't have them." Sebastian frowned. "One needs certainties, Mom." Professionally. It all seemed to collapse like the car on the hillside. In the midst of that mental storm, the images returned. The hand that held him, the impossible calm that wrapped around him. No, it couldn't be real, he muttered between his teeth, clenching his fists. But at the same time, a part of him resisted denying what he'd experienced. Robert visited the next day and noticed the unease in his face. "You're still thinking about what happened, right?" Sebastian nodded without looking. Rebelled with force. One night, while Patricia helped him settle into bed, he burst into frustration. "I'm tired of hearing that it was a miracle," he cried with eyes full of tears. "I don't want to depend on fantasies. I survived because I resisted, because my body endured." Patricia looked at him in silence, holding back her own tears. "Maybe you're right, Sebastian. Maybe you did resist. But tell me something. Do you really believe you are alone in that car?" The question hung in the air like, covered the basics, but there were medications that had to be bought outside, urgent x-rays that required immediate payment, and physical therapy sessions that cost more than they could imagine. Mrs. Rosa, with her strong but humble character, tried to maintain calm. However, each night she reviewed with concern the bills accumulated on the kitchen table. Patricia, always attentive, noticed it. "Mom, I could look for part-time work, maybe in a bookstore or a coffee shop," she suggested one. "Paying for all this?" Patricia hesitated, but seeing his insistence, she answered, "With raffles in the neighborhood, with what we've gathered among neighbors, and with Mom's savings." Sebastian clenched his teeth with frustration. "This isn't fair. All of this because of my accident." "Don't talk like that," she scolded him. "You didn't ask for it to happen, and you're not alone." The helplessness devoured him. He had always been the one who provided, who brought enough money so Patricia could. Days were a test of endurance for everyone. Patricia began to tutor neighborhood children in mathematics to help with expenses. Neighbors organized a gathering in the neighborhood plaza, selling snacks and drinks to raise funds. When Sebastian found out, he didn't know whether to feel grateful or humiliated. One afternoon, Robert visited and noticed his defeated demeanor. "You look worried, boy." "It's that I can't stand that my family has to beg for me," he answered bitterly. The old man looked. "And if you can't come back soon, we'll have to find a replacement." Sebastian swallowed hard, feeling the world crumble. "I'll do my best to recover, sir," he answered, though inside he knew his body was still far from ready. That night, when he told his mother and Patricia, the silence became heavy in the room. Mrs. Rosa only managed to grip her rosary tighter while Patricia took her brother's hand. "No matter what happens with that job, what matters is that you get up, even if it's step by." With him, you'll be able to walk, but it won't be easy. You'll need crutches, constant therapy, and a lot of discipline. Sebastian nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. "I'll do whatever it takes, doctor." The day he left the hospital, the outside light dazzled him. After so much time surrounded by white walls and cold hallways, seeing the open sky filled him with a strange sensation, as if he were being reborn. Patricia accompanied him carrying a bag with his belongings, while Mrs. Owens with crutches were clumsy and painful. Each step reminded him of his body's fragility. One afternoon, while trying to cross the living room, he tripped and fell to the floor. He hit the ground with rage. "I can't take it anymore. This is torture." Patricia ran to help him, but he pushed her hand away. "I don't need you to pick me up." She looked at him with firmness. "Yes, you do, and there's nothing wrong with that." Little by little, with effort and patience, he made progress. Physical therapy. "But when you're ready, we'll need you." Those words returned some of the lost confidence. The nights continued to be moments of reflection. Sebastian thought about the life he lived before, always in a hurry, without stopping to value what he had. Now every gesture from his family, every visit from a friend felt like a gift. One Sunday, while he held onto the railing of the terrace to exercise, Mrs. Rosa reproached. "You know, son, when you were in the hospital, I begged God to let you stay with." Return to life was not only physical, it was also an inner awakening that was just beginning to blossom. The nights had stopped being silent for Sebastian. Since his return home, dreams had become strange territory where reality and memory confused each other. One early morning, after a particularly exhausting rehabilitation day, he woke startled. He had dreamed again of the accident, the dark highway, rain pounding furiously, the car spinning out of control, and that firm hand holding him in the... Hallucination. What matters is what it meant to you. What did it mean? He asked, almost desperately. That you found hope in your darkest moment. That's already enough. His sister's words resonated within him. It wasn't a definitive answer, but a starting point. The next day, Robert visited him. Sebastian received him with a tired expression, but eager to talk. Robert, I need to ask you something. Do you believe in miracles? The old man looked at him calmly and settled into the chair. I. It was a miracle in the strict sense, but he did know that it had saved him. That same night, while the wind moved the branches of the tree in front of his window, Sebastian did something he hadn't done since childhood. He closed his eyes and with a trembling voice spoke into the darkness. Jesus, if it was you, thank you. Thank you for not letting go. Upon pronouncing those words, a strange peace wrapped around him. It wasn't the absolute certainty he had always demanded, but a sensation of... was enough to see him opening a crack in his heart. The accident had taken many things from him: security, independence, job stability, but it had also given him something he never had before, the ability to recognize that not everything depended on him. Sebastian understood that the moment of truth had arrived. It wasn't about abandoning logic or denying who he was, but accepting that life had dimensions that escaped his control, and perhaps that hand in the darkness had been the beginning of a... Able to get up, feel the fresh air, and hear his mother's voice in the kitchen preparing coffee. Life, which used to run like an endless race, now had a different rhythm, more human, more conscious. One day, while Patricia accompanied him to physical therapy, Sebastian confessed something that surprised her. You know, I think I don't want to live like before. Like before, so obsessed with projects, with proving I could do it alone. I realize now that's not the way. Patricia smiled. I always... I wanted to give up, days when I cried in rage. But if you're here, it's because you still have a road ahead, and believe me, it's worth fighting for." Mrs. Rosa observed her son with pride. "Look at you, Sebastian. Before you only thought about yourself, and now you help others. That's the real miracle." He lowered his gaze, moved. "Maybe you're right, Mom. Maybe the hand that held me didn't just save me. It gave me a new purpose." The changes reached his work, too, although the company hadn't yet. "We're an iron engineer, and now you even sound like a philosopher." Sebastian laughed. "I suppose I had to break to learn to build differently." The neighbors also noticed his transformation. He participated in community meetings, helped with small tasks, and whenever there were neighborhood activities, he was always willing to collaborate. His attitude inspired, because he did it not from pride, but from gratitude. One afternoon, while walking slowly through downtown with Patricia, he stopped to achievements, but in the ability to connect with others and be grateful for what you have. Although there were still wounds to heal, in his heart he knew he was no longer the same man. A new way of living had been born. Months after the accident, Sebastian decided to return to the place where it all began. The interstate between Phoenix and Tucson remained the same, busy, covered in mist on some stretches, lined with roadside food stands. However, for him it was no longer just another route, but placed the flowers on a rock and fell silent. The sound of wind among the trees and the memory of water pounding that night wrapped around him. He closed his eyes and felt a shudder. It was as if memory dragged him back to that moment when he thought he would die. But this time, instead of fear, he experienced gratitude. Mrs. Rosa approached and took his hand. "God gave you a second chance, son. Don't waste it." Sebastian's lips tightened emotionally. "I know, Mom, and believe me, every day I—" provoked a mixture of pride and reflection. Every person crossing is trusting in something we built. That trust is worth more than any recognition, he thought. At home, he gathered his mother and Patricia in the living room. With a calm voice, he shared what he felt. "I've been thinking a lot. The accident took many things from me, but it also gave me something bigger, the chance to change. I want to dedicate my life not just to building structures, but also to helping others going through." He told what he had felt in the car that night. He didn't speak with arrogance or with the intent to convince anyone. He simply narrated it as he had lived it. When I thought everything was ending, I felt like someone was holding me, and thanks to that I'm here. His life had changed forever. He was no longer the cold, pragmatic engineer who only trusted calculations and structures. Now he was a man who had learned to recognize fragility, to value his family's love, and to open himself to the narrative that, like this one, can inspire you deeply.